The Japanese are not the only ones fond of sake today. Hakutsuru has been brewing sake for over 260 years, and our sake is now enjoyed by discerning drinkers in over 40 countries and regions. Hakutsuru Sake Brewing is located in Kobe, a long and prosperous sake brewing region. Kobe has the perfect climate for brewing sake and the good quality water that is essential for growing rice. Rice quality is ensured through selected breeding and painstaking cultivation in the mountain fields watered by clear streams of pure water. This video shows how the golden ears of rice harvested in the autumn become rich flavored sake. The rice used to brew sake is more polished than the rice we eat. Until the mid-1920s, brown rice was mostly milled using water wheels to produce white rice. This shows rice milling in the 1930s. The introduction of rice mills was truly revolutionary. It led to increased productivity and ensured consistent quality of rice. Today, milling has improved with the use of computers to control the degree to which each rice variety is polished. The polished rice is temporarily stored at a low temperature in a special rice steamer before it is washed. The rice is washed to remove the white powder residue. This process was once entirely done by hand. Working with water in cold weather was tough work. In the 1930s, Hakutsuru used the latest rice washer to accurately wash the rice. Today, the rice is automatically washed using rice washers that stir the rice around in water. It is then soaked in water until it has absorbed the optimal amount of water before steaming. The soaked rice was well drained, then steamed in a large vat called a koshiki. Steam rises through the tiny holes in the bottom of the koshiki. Today, we use continuous rice steamers. This shows a koshiki still in use in the 1930s to steam rice. Rice removed from the koshiki using a bunji is pinched and kneaded like a rice cake to check the degree of steaming. Steamed rice is still checked using the same method today. Science and theory has a part to play in this stage, but human instinct and experience are still necessary. The steamed rice is divided according to its intended use, and each batch is cooled to the appropriate temperature. Removing the steamed rice from the koshiki is called koshiki dashi. One reason sake in the old days was brewed only during the winter is that adjusting the temperature of the steamed rice was easier. Today, the entire brewery is maintained at a constant, winter-like temperature. This means we can brew sake year-round by maintaining the brewery at the optimal temperatures and humidity. Koji is a type of yeast or mold. Let's look at the koji under a microscope. A distinctive feature of sake brewing is breeding koji in steamed rice. The koji enzymes break the rice starches into sugars and amino acid. Koji is bred in a muro, a special room kept at the optimal temperature and humidity. The koji spores are sprinkled over and kneaded into the steamed rice spread over the floor. This method is called tokomomi. Today, koji is made over approximately 40 hours at carefully controlled temperatures in a sealed room called the seikikushitsu. Fresh koji has a chestnut-like aroma. The sake's flavor and aroma are influenced by the koji quality in this important process. As implied in the common saying among sake brewers, first the koji, then the yeast, and last the mash starter. The pure yeast starter, important for fermenting the mash, as well as large volumes of yeast, are called moto or shubo. In the past, the koji and the steamed rice were placed in a vat called hangiri, mixed with a pole called kaibo, and mashed. This is called motosuri or yamaoroshi. This mixture is then transferred to a vat for motooroshi. Hot water is poured into a vat called dakidaru and stirred to adjust it to the optimal temperature for growing yeast. The moto is returned to the hangiri for cooling. Moto is grown naturally using this method, but skill and much effort are needed. Purely cultivated yeast, water, koji, and steamed rice are today placed in a stainless steel tank to grow the moto. This takes approximately 2 weeks while finally adjusting the temperature. The mash, or moromi, is produced by adding koji, steamed rice, and water to the moto. Refined sake is brewed in 3 steps at the mash stage: soe, naka, and tome. This process is called sandanjikomi. The koji, steamed rice, and water are stirred well using a pole called kaiire. The brewers worked round the clock to dissipate the foam that forms on the surface as the moromi ferments to prevent it from overflowing. Today, the moromi temperature is automatically adjusted according to the room temperature using special equipment. Sandanjikomi remains unchanged today. Let's look at the difference in the foam during the fermenting process. The foam bubbles in the first stage become more adhesive and rise in the mix. The surface looks rocky, so the foam is called iwaawa. The carbon dioxide produced as fermenting progresses makes the foam higher. This foam, called takawa, continues for almost 1 week. Fermentation is at its peak when the foam bubbles are large and light. This foam, called ochiawa, dissipates when stirred. The final stage in the sake brewing process begins 3 weeks later, when fermentation ends and the moromi matures. The moromi is placed in canvas bags known as sakabukuro for sake pressing, and lined up on the sakafune. Pressure is applied to strain the sake. Freshly pressed sake flows from the huneguchi. The pressed sake is filtered to produce clear, refined sake. The refined sake undergoes a pasteurization process called hiire and stored until the autumn. Today, a press is applied to the mature mash to separate the sake from the lees. The clear, refined sake is pasteurized and aged for 6 months before the fresh sake is ready for shipping. The aged sake is then barreled. The barrels are carefully covered with woven straw mats called komo and shipped. Today, the process is automated and our sake is shipped in bottles, sake cartons, and glass cups. With an eye on quality control, we deliver our sake from Japan to sake lovers around the world.